"Alessandro, I'm carrying your child!" Vanessa Cole stood in the center of the glittering ballroom, one trembling hand pressed against her stomach, tears shimmering in her eyes like diamonds under the chandeliers. 300 guests, judges who owed favors, politicians who owed more, and the most dangerous families on the East Coast rose to their feet as one. The applause exploded like a wave crashing against marble. Somewhere near the string quartet, a champagne glass slipped from someone's fingers and shattered on the floor. The sound swallowed instantly by cheering. Camera flashes burst across the room like small lightning. Men in $10,000 suits raised their glasses. Women in silk pressed hands to their hearts. And at the center of it all stood Aleandro Moretti, 38 years old, the most powerful man on the East Coast, frozen. For exactly 1 second, his face showed something no one in that room had ever seen on it before. Not shock, something quieter. Something almost like fear. Then it cracked into a wide, disbelieving smile, and the room roared louder. They said Alessandro Moretti trusted no one. They were almost right. He had inherited his father's empire at 24. On the night a traitor from inside the family put 2 bullets in the old man's back. Since that night, Alessandro had built his power on a single rule: verify everything, believe no one. He had survived 14 years at the top of a world that buried trusting men early. But tonight, for the first time since his father's funeral, Alessandro Moretti had allowed himself to believe in the woman beside him, in the child she claimed was growing inside her, in a future that looked, for one shining moment, like a family. He raised his glass, the room raised theirs, and behind a marble column wrapped in white orchids, a 3-year-old girl with wild curls tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed one tiny finger at the woman in the white dress. The applause was still fading, glasses still lifted in the air, when a small voice rang out from behind the marble column, clear, innocent, and far too loud for a ballroom settling into silence. "But Mama, the pretty lady's tummy is a pillow. I saw her put it in the closet. It has flowers on it, like my blanket." For 1 full second, nobody moved. 300 people, a string quartet frozen mid-note, the violinist's bow hovering above the strings, a photographer's flash dissolving slowly in the air, the entire room, suspended between one heartbeat and the next. The little girl standing beside the column was named Emma, 3 years old, a small tornado of wild curls and endless questions, blinking up at the crowd with absolutely no idea that she had just detonated a bomb in a room full of the most dangerous people on the East Coast. The woman whose sleeve she was still clutching was her mother, Sophia, the housekeeper who had worked inside the Moretti mansion for 3 years. A widow, a woman who had learned, in rooms exactly like this one, the art of being invisible. She moved through the world of powerful men the way smoke moves through a house present, necessary, unseen. In 3 years, she had never once drawn attention to herself. Tonight, 300 pairs of eyes were locked onto her at the same time. She hadn't even been supposed to be down here. Emma had been running a fever all week, and daycare was impossible, so the boss himself had quietly told Sophia to bring the girl along and keep her in the family room upstairs. "Nobody will even notice," he'd said. But Emma had begged to see the pretty dresses just for 1 minute, and Sophia's resolve had melted the way it always did, and they had slipped down the side staircase to stand behind the orchid-wrapped pillar, just for 1 minute. 1 minute had been enough. A ripple of confused laughter moved through the crowd, the nervous kind of laughter people use when they don't understand what is happening but feel they should react somehow. Someone whispered. Someone else coughed. Vanessa's smile did not fade. It froze like a mask suddenly nailed to her face. "Children have such adorable imaginations," she said, her laugh high and bright and a half-second too quick. Her hand slid around Alessandro's arm. "Darling, let's continue. Everyone's waiting for the toast." Alessandro did not move. "Wait." 1 word. He didn't raise his voice, he never needed to, but it cut through the ballroom like a blade through silk. The murmurs died instantly. In this city, when Alessandro Moretti said wait, the world waited. He set his champagne glass down on the table, crossed the marble floor, and did something no one in that room had ever seen the most feared man on the East Coast do. He lowered himself onto one knee, bringing his eyes level with a 3-year-old's. "What pillow, sweetheart?" His voice was gentle in a way that made it more frightening, not less. "Whose closet?" Emma, delighted that the tall man was finally paying attention to her, pointed one tiny finger straight at Vanessa's stomach. "The white dress lady's pillow. Mama cleans her room. It has flowers on it." Mama said, "Don't tell nobody," and every head in the ballroom turned toward Sophia. Sophia's heart was pounding so hard she thought the whole ballroom could hear it. 300 faces stared at her: senators, judges, Men whose names were whispered instead of spoken, and in that endless, suffocating moment, her mind did what every survivor's mind does. It calculated. Rent was due in 9 days. This job was everything: the roof over Emma's head, the medicine for her fevers, the small, warm apartment that stood between them and the street. Sophia had no family in this city, no savings that would last a month, and no reference letter waiting for a housekeeper who humiliated her employer's fiancé in front of the most powerful people on the East Coast. All she had to say was, "She's confused, sir. Children imagine things. Please forgive us." Then take Emma's hand, disappear up the side staircase, and keep her life exactly as it was. Every reason in the world told her to lie, but standing there, under the weight of 300 stairs, Sophia thought of a grave on the north side of the city, a simple stone with her husband's name on it. He had died because powerful men discovered a problem and chose silence over truth, because everyone who could have spoken up had decided their jobs were worth more than his life. She had knelt beside that grave with a 2-month-old daughter in her arms and made a promise to the man beneath it. "I will never become one of the silent ones, no matter what it costs me." The cost had finally come to collect. "Mr. Moretti." Her voice trembled, but it carried. 6 weeks ago, I was cleaning Miss Cole's private suite. At the bottom of her closet, I found a maternity pillow, the silicone kind, shaped like a pregnant belly. It was still in its box. There was a receipt with it. I wasn't searching for anything. I saw it while I was arranging her shoes, and I put it back exactly where it was, because it was not my business. She swallowed hard, pulling Emma closer against her leg. "I never told a single soul. I swear it on my daughter's life. But I talk to myself when I clean. It's a habit, and Emma must have heard me. She repeats everything she hears. That is all this is." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Sophia had ever heard. Then Vanessa laughed, and it was not the bright, polished laugh from before. This one was sharp, ugly, stripped of every ounce of charm. The mask hadn't just frozen now. It was cracking. "Oh, this is rich." She turned to the crowd, arms spread, playing to her audience. "The housekeeper. Everyone, the housekeeper. This woman has been obsessed with Alessandro for years. Ask the staff how she looks at him. She smuggles her child into his home to build her little position. She digs through my private belongings. And now she's coached a toddler to humiliate me at my own engagement party." She spun back to Alessandro, eyes blazing. "Are you really going to stand here and take the word of the help over the woman carrying your child?" Alessandro said nothing for a long moment. He was looking at Emma, who had buried her face in her mother's skirt, frightened by the shouting, whispering, "Mama, I want to go home. 3-year-olds don't coach lies." "Vanessa," his voice was quiet. "They repeat what they hear. In another man's world, what came next would have happened behind closed doors, quiet lawyers, private conversations, a scandal managed in the dark. But Alessandro Moretti had not survived 14 years at the top of his world by managing things in the dark. In his world, there was only one way to answer a question like this one, immediately, and in front of witnesses. "Lock the doors," he said, without raising his voice. "No one leaves." The heavy ballroom doors closed with a sound like a verdict. 300 of the most powerful people on the East Coast suddenly discovered they were not guests anymore. They were a jury. Marco, a broad-shouldered man near the entrance, stepped forward. Marco, the right hand who had served the Moretti family since Alessandro's father ruled it. The man who stood at every event the way furniture stands in a room. Silent, constant, forgotten until needed. He was needed now. Miss Cole's suite, the closet, the luggage, everything. Alessandro's eyes never left his fiancée. "Bring me what you find." That was when Vanessa stopped performing. "You will not go through my things." Her voice cracked across the ballroom, shrill where it had always been silk. "I am your fiancé. I am carrying your child, Alessandro. 18 months. 18 months I have loved you. And you would humiliate me like this, in front of everyone, over the babbling of a servant's brat?" She clutched at his sleeve. "If you do this, there is no coming back from it. Do you hear me? Think about what you're destroying." And that was her first confession, though she didn't know it. Because that room was not filled with ordinary people. It was filled with men and women who had survived decades in the underworld by reading faces the way scholars read books. And every single one of them saw it. The visible mathematics on a woman's face as she calculated whether the lie could still be saved. A woman with nothing to hide demands the search. A woman begging to prevent it has already told you what it will find. Nobody said a word. 300 people simply watched her, and their silence was more brutal than any accusation. Marco returned in 11 minutes. They felt like an hour. He carried 3 things across that marble floor, and he set them on the table beside the untouched engagement cake, one by one, like evidence before a court. A silicone maternity pillow, still in its box printed with small flowers, a store receipt, dated 9 weeks earlier, and a second cell phone, found beneath the false bottom of a suitcase. The pillow made the room gasp. The phone made it go cold. "Open it," Alessandro said quietly. The lock was amateur work. His security man broke it in 90 seconds, right there on the table. And then the screen was glowing in the silent ballroom, and Marco was scrolling. And his face, the face of a man who had seen everything twice, was changing. Crudely coded messages. A calendar of secret meetings stretching back more than a year. Photographs taken inside the mansion of ledgers, shipping schedules, private documents from Alessandro's own study, and a name, one name, appearing again and again, that made 300 people of the underworld go still in their bones. Vittorio Romano, the rival Don, the man who had lost the war for the southern port to Alessandro 5 years ago and had never forgiven it. This was no longer a story about a woman faking a pregnancy. This was a spy, planted in the very bed of the empire. Alessandro stood motionless, his face settling into that particular stillness, the stillness of a man using every ounce of his strength not to fall apart in front of 300 witnesses. Alessandro picked up the phone, and in front of 300 witnesses, in a voice that never rose above a conversation, he began to read. October 9th. He's starting to trust you. Push the wedding date. The lawyers finish the asset agreements in March. You must be married before March. Vanessa's face drained of color. November 2nd. Good work on the shipping schedules. Next, the ledgers in his study. Photograph everything. December 14th. Tell him you're pregnant. A man like Moretti will move heaven and earth for an heir. Once you're his wife, everything he owns has a door, and you are the key. He lowered the phone. The ballroom was so silent that the ticking of someone's watch could be heard 3 tables away. The whole design lay exposed now, elegant and vicious. A beautiful woman placed in his path at a charity auction 18 months ago. The slow siege of his trust. A fake pregnancy timed precisely to force a wedding before the legal walls around his assets were finished. And then as his wife, the books, the roots, the names of every man loyal to the Moretti family, delivered piece by piece to Vittorio Romano, so the rival Don could swallow the empire whole from the inside, without firing a single shot. 2 years of work, undone by a 3-year-old who liked flowers on a pillow. Alessandro. Vanessa's voice had changed again, the fury gone, replaced by something soft and broken and rehearsed. She stepped toward him, hands open. Listen to me. It started as a job, yes, but I fell in love with you. Somewhere along the way, it became real. You have to believe me. We can fix this. Send these people home and let me explain. Explain the pillow? He asked quietly. Or the photographs of my ledgers? The softness died in her eyes, and what rose behind it, in front of everyone, was the last card of a cornered woman. You don't know what Vittorio is capable of, she hissed. You think tonight hurt? Cross him, and you'll lose everything you love. That's not a threat, Alessandro. That's a warning. Alessandro looked at her for a long moment, this woman he had almost given his name, his empire, his life. A woman truly carrying my child wouldn't need a pillow, he said, softly enough that it should have been private, clearly enough that all 300 heard it. And a woman who truly loved me wouldn't need Vittorio Romano's phone number. Something in her finally snapped. She wrenched the 4-carat diamond from her finger and threw it onto the tablecloth beside the untouched cake, where it landed with a small, almost comically insignificant clink. 2 years of scheming, reduced to the sound of a coin dropped in an empty church. Then she walked, straight through the center of the ballroom, chin high, heels striking the marble in sharp, furious echoes, 300 guests parting in silence to let her pass until the heavy doors swung shut behind her, and she was gone. She did not go home. She did not go to the airport. That same night, across the city, in a warehouse office that smelled of salt and cigar smoke, Vanessa Cole actually knelt, before a gray-haired man with eyes like a winter harbor. They know everything, she said. I need protection. I earned it. 2 years, Vittorio. I gave you 2 years. Vittorio Romano looked down at her the way a man looks at a broken tool. 2 years of investment. 2 years of patient poison gone, because of a child. He was silent for a long time. Then he asked one question. This child. And her mother. He turned a cigar slowly between his fingers. How much do they matter to Moretti? And Vanessa for the first time that night smiled. The party dissolved the way funerals do. Quietly, quickly, nobody sure what to say. Within an hour, The ballroom stood empty, except for abandoned champagne glasses and a 4-carat diamond still lying on the tablecloth where no one had dared to touch it. At midnight, word came down through Marco. Mr. Moretti wants to see the housekeeper. In his study, alone, Sophia climbed the stairs with Emma asleep on her shoulder, and with every step she prepared herself for what was coming. She had worked in the houses of powerful people her whole life, and she knew the unwritten rule. The person who witnesses the boss's worst night rarely survives the aftermath. Nobody wants you around afterward, standing in their hallways like a living reminder of the moment their world fell apart. There would be an envelope, perhaps, a month's severance if he was generous, a quiet request to be gone by morning. She stepped into the study, ready for the ending. Alessandro stood by the window with his tie undone, looking out at the city he owned pieces of. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, without turning, "I owe you an apology." Sophia blinked. "Sir, no. I'm the one who should apologize. My daughter, I never should have brought her downstairs. I was told to keep her." "Don't." He turned around. "Don't apologize for her. She's 3. She told the truth because she doesn't know how not to yet. And that makes her the most honest person who has set foot in this house in years." He paused. "Including me." He crossed to his desk and sat on the edge of it. And suddenly he didn't look like the most feared man on the East Coast. He looked tired, and younger, and strangely alone. "You've worked under my roof for 3 years, Sophia. I know your schedule, I know your salary, and tonight I realized I have never once asked you a real question about your life. I let you bring your daughter here because it cost me nothing, and I never thought about what it cost you. Living every day knowing that one change of my mood could take everything from you overnight." He looked at her then, and asked the question no one had ever asked him permission to answer. "Have I been a good man, Sophia, or just a man powerful enough that nobody around me felt safe telling me the truth?" It was, she knew, the kind of question that could end a career if answered wrong. And after everything that had happened tonight, it was the kind of question she owed an honest answer. "You've been fair," she said carefully. "You pay on time. You never raise your voice. You let me bring Emma when I had nowhere else." She hesitated, then kept her promise to a gravestone. "But you let the people around you take advantage of you, sir. Not because you judge character badly, because you're so used to everyone wanting something from you that you've stopped believing anyone could want nothing." She met his eyes. Miss Cole wasn't the first to use that. She was just the first one who got caught. Silence. Then Alessandro laughed, not bitterly, but with something that sounded almost like relief. 3 years! And you're the first person in this building who has ever said something like that to my face." He moved to pour himself a drink, and his sleeve caught the edge of a half-open desk drawer. Something small fluttered out and landed on the carpet, a folded handkerchief, old linen, embroidered with sprigs of lavender. Before either adult could move, Emma stirred on her mother's shoulder, slid down half asleep, and toddled over. She picked up the handkerchief with both hands, the way children carry precious things, and held it up to him. "Why are you sad, mister?" she asked, her eyes barely open. Alessandro froze. His mother had embroidered that lavender 40 years ago. It was the last thing of hers he had left, and in all the years since her death, in all the crowded rooms of his glittering life, no one in this house had ever asked him that question. "Thank you, Piccolina," he said quietly, and his voice was not quite steady. And that was when Marco's phone rang sharp in the midnight silence, with news from the streets. The night was not over. It was only beginning. The news from the streets that night was simple and cold. Vittorio Romano was moving. By sunrise, Alessandro had turned his empire inside out. Every lock in the mansion was changed, every code, every safe combination, every account password replaced. The shipping routes Vanessa had photographed were rerouted overnight. Warehouses were emptied and moved. And then came the quieter, uglier work. The phone from the false-bottomed suitcase had revealed more than meetings. It had revealed helpers. 2 men inside the organization, a dock scheduler and a driver, had been feeding her small pieces of the machine. By noon of the first day, both were gone from the city, and the message their departure sent needed no translation. But Vittorio did not go quiet. The reports came in hour after hour, each one darker. He was calling in old soldiers who had scattered after losing the port war 5 years ago. He was buying weapons. He was spending money like a man who no longer cared about profit, only about wounds. A rival who accepts defeat retreats. A rival who spends like that is planning something personal. In the middle of the storm, Alessandro summoned Sophia to the study and slid an envelope across the desk. "Paid leave. Full salary. There's a town upstate, quiet, safe. I'd feel better if you and Emma were away from the city until this settles." Sophia looked at the envelope and didn't take it. Emma's still running fevers, sir. Her doctor is 10 minutes from here. I have no family upstate, no family anywhere. She paused, and there was something else underneath her words, something she had no name for yet and did not examine too closely. This cold marble fortress was the only place in the world that had ever given her daughter a safe corner to play in. If it's all the same to you, we'll stay. He should have insisted. He would remember that later, that he should have insisted. And so came the strangest 3 days of Alessandro Moretti's life. By day, he ran a war. Maps on the study table, capos filing in and out, Marco coordinating watches on every Romano property in the city. By night, he would pass the small family room off the kitchen and stop. Emma was always there, curls wild, stacking wooden blocks with the fierce concentration of a 3-year-old architect. And she had decided, with the absolute authority of small children, that the tall man belonged to her now. "Sit, Mr. Sandro," she commanded the first night, patting the rug. "You have to help." And the most feared man on the East Coast, the man who had spent that entire day deciding which of his enemies would still have businesses by Friday, lowered himself onto the floor and stacked blocks. "The blue one goes on top," Emma informed him gravely. "Blue is the strongest color. Is that so?" "Everybody knows that," she sighed, with the weariness of a professor correcting a slow student. He came back the second night. And the third. 15 minutes here, 20 there, while Sophia folded laundry nearby and pretended not to watch them. He couldn't have explained it to his capos, couldn't have explained it to himself, but somewhere between the blue blocks and the solemn lectures, something that had stood hollow in his chest for years was quietly beginning to fill. He would remember those 3 evenings for the rest of his life, because of what they were, and because of what came on the 4th day. On the 4th afternoon, Emma's fever spiked again. Her regular doctor had one opening. It was 10 minutes away. Sophia had made the drive 100 times. She didn't tell the guards. It was 15 minutes outside the mansion's protection. Nothing more. A mother and a sick child and a prescription. 4 blocks from the doctor's office. A gray van pulled out sideways and blocked the street. It took 30 seconds. No shouting. Not a single shot. And Sophia and Emma were gone. The call reached the mansion at 4:47 inches the afternoon. Sophia's car had been found 4 blocks from the doctor's office, abandoned in the middle of the street, engine still running, driver's door open, and in the back seat, a child's booster chair empty, the small safety buckle still clipped, as if tiny hands had been lifted straight out of it. Marco delivered the report himself, because news like this could not come from anyone else. He had served this family for 30 years. He had stood beside Alessandro at his father's grave, through 2 wars, through nights of blood and worse. In all that time, he had never once seen the man lose control. Alessandro listened to the end without a word. Then he turned and drove his fist through the glass top of his own desk. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The blood ran down between his knuckles and dripped onto the shattered glass, and the most feared man on the East Coast stood there breathing like something was broken loose inside his chest. And every man in that room understood they were seeing something they were never meant to see. The package arrived at midnight. A plain cardboard box, left at the outer gate by a taxi driver who had been paid in cash by a stranger. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, lay one small pink sneaker with a daisy printed on the toe, Emma's shoe. Beneath it, a single typed page, the Southern Port, full transfer of holdings, signed, plus the complete list of your routes, schedules, contacts, all of it. You have 48 hours. Deliver, and they come home untouched. Refuse, and I will return them to you one piece at a time. V.R. And at the bottom, in looping, elegant, unmistakable handwriting, a postscript added in ink, a blade dipped in poison. Now you know how it feels to lose what you love. V. Alessandro read the page twice. Then he dismissed everyone Marco last, and Marco hesitated at the door before obeying, and stood alone in the ruined study at 1 o'clock in the morning. On the desk, among the pebbles of broken glass, lay the lavender handkerchief. He picked it up and closed his fist around it, the old linen soft against his bleeding knuckles, and made himself look directly at the truth he had been walking around for 3 days. Vittorio Romano had studied him. Vittorio could have hit warehouses, ships, money, men, the ordinary hostages of an ordinary war. Instead, in one strike, he had reached past all of it and taken the only thing Alessandro could not replace. Not the port, not the fortune. A housekeeper and a 3-year-old girl. When did that happen? He asked the empty room. When did the most protected man on the East Coast, the man with no family, no attachments, no weaknesses, hand his entire heart to a widow and her daughter without ever noticing? The answer did not come like thunder. It came quietly, like something that had been sitting in the corner of the room for a long time, waiting patiently to be acknowledged. It had happened in a ballroom full of liars, on the night a 3-year-old told a truth that 300 adults were too afraid to speak. It had happened in a doorway, watching a small hand hold up his mother's handkerchief. "Why are you sad, mister?" It had happened on the floor of the family room, one blue block at a time. Vanessa had spent 2 years and a fortune trying to find a way into his heart, and failed. A little girl with a fever had done it in 3 evenings, for free. Alessandro opened his hand and looked at the lavender embroidery for a long moment. Then he folded the handkerchief, placed it in his breast pocket, and picked up the phone. His voice, when he spoke, was very calm, the calm of deep water. "Marco, summon the council, now." At 3 o'clock in the morning, the men who ran the Moretti empire gathered in the sealed conference room beneath the mansion's 6 capos, some of whom had served under Alessandro's father, faces carved from decades of this life. Marco laid out the ultimatum. The port, the routes, 48 hours. The explosion was immediate. Impossible. Salvatore, the eldest, was on his feet before Marco finished. "Don Moretti, with respect, you cannot surrender territory for a housekeeper. The moment word gets out, and word always gets out, every enemy this family has will smell blood in the water. The Irish, the cartels, the families in the north, they'll know exactly what it costs to bring us to our knees. Grab a maid, name your price. She is staff, Don Moretti," another said, softer, meaning it kindly. "A good woman, no one denies it. But she is not family, not blood. Men have died for this organization. We did not hand over ports for them." They offered him the 2 options that men like them always offered. The first, negotiate. Stall, bargain, drag Vittorio through weeks of talks, wear the price down. Everyone at the table knew what condition hostages came back in after weeks of stalling, if they came back at all. The second was not spoken directly. It never was. It came wrapped in the careful, evasive language of men who had survived too long in this world. Sometimes losses must be accepted. Sometimes the mathematics are cruel. No one would question your strength, Don Moretti, if the sentence was left unfinished, because finishing it required saying "let them die" out loud. Alessandro had listened to all of it in silence, hands flat on the table, the bandage across his knuckles the only sign of the last 12 hours. When he finally spoke, he did not raise his voice and the room went still as a held breath. 3 weeks ago, I stood in a ballroom with 300 of the most important people on this coast. Senators, judges, allies. Every one of them smiled at me while a lie was being sold in front of their eyes, and not one of them said a word. His eyes moved slowly around the table. One person in that room told me the truth. One. A woman with rent due in 9 days and a sick child on her hip, who had everything to lose and nothing to gain. She chose the truth anyway. He leaned forward. "So understand me. If this empire can only survive by letting people like that die, then it deserves to fall." No one answered. "We are not giving Vittorio the list," he continued. 300 names are on those routes. Drivers, dockmen, their wives, their children. He'll bleed them all within a year. And we are not abandoning the hostages. There is a third option. He nodded to Marco, who spread a harbor map across the table. "He expects me at a negotiating table, broken and stalling. So on the second night of his deadline, while he's watching his phone, we take them back." The plan unfolded. The old cannery compound on the North Docks, confirmed by 2 independent watchers, a small strike force, in and out before Romano's soldiers understood what was happening, and I lead it myself. The room erupted again. This violated every law of survival their world had ever written. Dons did not walk through doors. Dons sent men through doors, but Alessandro simply waited it out like stone in a current. Only Marco made one last attempt, quietly, when the others had exhausted themselves. "Your father would never permit this. My father died because he trusted the wrong man," Alessandro said. 3 weeks ago, I nearly repeated his mistake at an altar. Tonight I finally know who deserves my trust, and I am going to bring them home, even if it has to be done in blood." Marco looked at him for a long moment. Then the old soldier bowed his head. "Then I'm at your side, Don Moretti." As I was at his. The council dispersed at dawn to prepare, and in the armory that evening, before mounting the vest, Alessandro took the lavender handkerchief from his suit and tucked it into the breast pocket of his tactical gear, directly over his heart. That night, for the first time in 14 years, the Don loaded his own weapon. Across the city, in the abandoned cannery on the North Docks, the air smelled of salt and rust and old machine oil. They were being kept in what had once been a foreman's office, a concrete room with one barred window and a steel door. Sophia had spent the first hours doing the only thing that mattered, making sure Emma never learned what fear was. "This is the best camping trip ever," Sophia whispered, spreading the thin blanket into a tent against the wall. "We're explorers. Explorers eat crackers for dinner and sleep in secret forts. Like brave girls," Emma said solemnly. "Exactly like brave girls." And while her daughter played explorer, the invisible woman went to work. 3 years of moving unseen through rooms full of dangerous men had taught Sophia a skill no one suspected she had. She noticed everything. 2 guards outside the door, the shifts changed roughly every 4 hours. The young one smoked and left every 50 minutes to do it. The window bars were rusted at the lower left corner. When the guards had brought food, the tray came with a cheap metal fork, and one bent tine of it was now hidden flat inside her sleeve. She didn't have a plan yet, but her husband used to say, "Collect the pieces first, the plan comes later." On the second evening, the steel door opened, and silk entered the rust. Vanessa stood in the doorway in a dove-gray dress that had no business in a cannery, arms folded, wearing the smile of a woman who had rehearsed this visit in a mirror. "Well," she said, looking down at the blanket tent, the crackers, the child, the honest housekeeper. "I had to see it for myself." She stepped closer, heels clicking on the concrete. "Tell me something, Sophia. All that truth-telling, what exactly did it buy you? A rope around your world? A concrete room? Your daughter as a bargaining chip?" She tilted her head. "You could have stayed quiet and kept your safe little life. Honesty put you here." Sophia rose slowly, placing herself between Vanessa and the tent. And when she answered, her voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath the softness. "It bought my daughter a mother she will never have to be ashamed of." She looked Vanessa over. The silk, the perfect hair, the careful face. "And you? What did all the lying buy you?" "A beautiful dress in a rusting warehouse, surrounded by men who see you as a broken tool. When this is over, they will throw you away, and you know it. That's why you came down here, isn't it? To find someone lower than you, and you still couldn't." Vanessa's smile flickered, and before she could rebuild it, a small voice piped up from the blanket tent. Emma had crawled out, curls wild, and was studying Vanessa's flat stomach with genuine 3-year-old concern. "Did you run out of pillow babies?" Silence. Then the guard at the door made a strangled sound and turned his face away, but not fast enough to hide the grin. Even here, in the heart of her own ally's fortress, a 3-year-old had needed only 5 words to show everyone exactly what Vanessa Cole was worth. Vanessa left without another word, her heels striking the concrete like little gunshots. Upstairs, in the glass-walled office overlooking the cannery floor, Vittorio Romano stood studying the harbor lights and listened to a soldier confirm the arrangements for the exchange. Moretti's lawyers had made contact. The signals suggested a man breaking, preparing to pay. "And when the transfer is complete," the soldier asked, "we release them where?" Vittorio turned the cigar slowly between his fingers. "We don't." The soldier blinked. "Boss? They've seen faces. They've seen this place." He looked back at the water, and his voice held nothing at all. "And I want Moretti to understand what losing means. He'll get the woman and the child back when it's over." A pause, just not breathing. The clock on the wall read 11:40. The second night of the deadline had begun. 3 o'clock in the morning, the second night of the deadline. 2 black boats slid across the harbor with their engines dead, rowed the final 400 meters by hand. Salt fog lay thick on the water. 8 men in dark gear. No lights. No sound but the dip of oars and breath behind masks. Alessandro crouched at the bow of the first boat, the cold spray on his face, the lavender handkerchief pressed flat over his heart beneath the armor. The radio crackled once, softly. Marco's voice. "Ground team in position. Power station reached. On your word." The plan was 3 blades striking at once. Cut the electricity to the entire compound. First team through the loading doors on the east side, Alessandro leading it. Against every protest, every rule, every precedent of the world he ruled. Second team down through the roof of the old cannery hall, and Marco holding the extraction point at the north fence with the armored truck. Engine warm, doors open. 30 seconds of darkness before Romano's men found their flashlights. That was the window. Everything lived or died inside those 30 seconds. The boats touched the pilings without a sound. "Now," Alessandro breathed. Somewhere inland, a transformer died. The dock lights blinked once, and the whole compound went black. They moved. Over the seawall, across the gravel yard. The first perimeter guard was lighting a cigarette when a forearm closed across his throat. He was asleep on the ground before the match went out. The second guard never turned around. Then into the container corridors stacked steel canyons, darkness thick as the inside of a stone. Alessandro led with his hand on the container wall, counting turns from the map burned into his memory. Left, 40 meters. Right. Somewhere above, a drop of condensation fell and struck a steel roof. Every man froze. Nothing. They moved again. A guard's radio hissed 20 feet away. East side's dark, checking the breaker. And a flashlight beam swept the gap between containers, passing half a meter from Alessandro's boot. He stood motionless, not breathing, until the light moved on. Then the foreman's block. One steel door. One guard fumbling with a lighter dealt with quietly, quickly. Alessandro reached the door and looked through the narrow gap at the hinge, and his heart, which had stayed level through the water, the wall, the dark, stumbled. In the corner of the concrete room, in a fort made of one thin blanket, Sophia sat with Emma wrapped in her arms, rocking her slowly, her cheek against the wild curls, guarding her even in her sleep. The lock surrendered to the pick in 11 seconds. The door opened. Sophia's head snapped up, arms tightening around her daughter, ready to fight with a bent fork in her bare hands, and then she saw the eyes above the mask. Emma woke, blinked once at the armored figure in the doorway, and her whole face lit up like morning, no shock, not 1 second of doubt, as if she had simply been waiting, as if the outcome had never been in question in the entire history of the world. Mr. Sandro Came. Sophia clapped a gentle hand over the small mouth, but her own eyes were streaming, and they said the thing that 3 years of careful silence had never once permitted her to say. He crossed the room. "Can you run?" She nodded, already lifting Emma to her chest. They slipped into the corridor, 20 meters to the yard. The radio whispered, "Extraction ready. North fence clear." Every floodlight in the compound blazed on at once, white light everywhere, a siren screaming off the steel canyons. 8 men caught in the open like moths on glass. Then a voice rolled out of the loudspeakers, calm, unhurried, almost warm, and all the more terrible for it. "I've been waiting for you for 2 nights, Moretti." It was a trap. The first shots came before the siren finished its first scream. Muzzle flashes bloomed from the catwalks, from the warehouse windows, from behind the crane housing's crossfire, prepared and patient, tearing the night into ribbons. The team scattered into the container canyons, steel ringing around them like struck bells. "Vehicle! Bring the vehicle in!" Marco's voice roared through the radio, and from the north fence came the bellow of the armored truck's engine, headlights punching through the fog as it smashed the gate off its hinges. Alessandro pressed Sophia and Emma into the gap between 2 containers. Emma was crying now the camping trip was over. The world was noise and fire, and Sophia held the small face against her shoulder, whispering, "Don't look, baby, don't look. We're almost home. Stay behind me," Alessandro said. "Move when I move. Stop when I stop." They ran the maze in bursts, gap to gap, shadow to shadow. Bullets slapped the steel a foot above their heads, and every crossing was a coin flipped in the dark. 2 of his men laid down covering fire from the seawall. The truck ground forward through the yard, drawing half the storm onto its armored hide. Then the containers ended. 20 meters of open ground lay between them and the truck's rear doors. 20 meters of bare concrete, lit white by the floodlights, without a scrap of cover. Marco was already there, door open, arm reaching, his voice through the radio. Now the catwalk's reloading. Go!" Alessandro shouted. Sophia ran, Emma crushed to her chest, her shadow flying long and thin across the concrete. Alessandro came behind her, deliberately behind, matching her pace, his body squared between her back and the guns, a moving wall of armor and will. 10 meters. Marco's hand stretching out. 5. Movement on the mezzanine, a rifleman rising from cover, barrel swinging down, aimed not at the armored man but at the easier target, the running woman with the child. There was no time to shout a warning, no time to aim, no time to think. So Alessandro didn't think. He turned and threw himself into the line of fire. The world hit him 3 times. That was how it felt, not like being shot, like being hit by 3 fists the size of engines. 1 low on the side where the vest ended, 2 through the chest plate's failing edge. There was no pain at first. That surprised him distantly, just the impacts, and then the cold, a strange, spreading cold that started in his chest and flowed outward, as if someone had opened a door to winter inside him. The gunfire grew muffled, far away, like fireworks heard from underwater. The floodlights smeared into halos. The only thing that stayed sharp, the only sound in the whole drowning world that kept its edges, was a small voice screaming from the truck. "Mr. Sandro. Mr. Sandro." He was on one knee. He didn't remember kneeling. Sophia was turning back for him. No, 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 and his arm rose on its own and shoved her the last meter into Marco's grip. His other hand lifted the pistol, and with the final round in the magazine, fired once at the mezzanine. The rifleman folded and did not get up. Marco hauled Sophia bodily into the truck as she fought him, screaming Alessandro's name, her hand still stretched toward the man kneeling in the white light, Emma's face pressed to the armored glass, small palms flat against it. Alessandro knelt on the cold concrete, breathing in short, careful sips, and over his heart, blooming slowly through the fabric of the breast pocket, his mother's lavender handkerchief, the last gift she ever gave him, was turning red. Don Moretti, the truck. Now! Marco's voice tore through the radio. Alessandro did not move toward the truck, because through the smoke and the dying gunfire, a figure was walking out into the center of the yard unhurried, coat open, a pistol held loosely at his side. Gray hair, winter eyes. Vittorio Romano had come down from his glass office to finish this personally, and Alessandro understood, with the cold clarity that comes when the body is failing and the mind burns clean. If Vittorio Romano was still breathing tomorrow, there would be another van on another street, another small shoe in another box. Sophia and Emma would spend their lives as targets because Vittorio did not forgive, and Vittorio did not forget. This ended here, tonight, or it never ended at all. Alessandro rose off his knee and stood. Look at you, Vittorio's voice carried across the concrete, almost gentle. The great Moretti. Bleeding out on my dock for a maid. He raised the pistol. Your father at least died for something. The pistol barked and Alessandro was already moving, sideways into the shadow of the crane, and the shot sparked off steel. Then, the distance closed, and it was no longer a shooting. It was two men in the oldest kind of war there is. There was nothing beautiful about it. No cinema. Vittorio was healthy, rested, strong, and he fought like a man collecting on 5 years of humiliation, hammering blows into wounds he knew were there. Alessandro fought with 3 bullets in him, and the ground tilting under his feet, and every second cost him blood he did not have. Vittorio saw the blood, and he saw victory. He grew confident. He grew careless. That was his last mistake, because a man with nothing to lose fights hard, but a man with something to protect fights harder. Vittorio was fighting for hatred, for a port, for a wound to his pride. 20 meters away, behind armored glass, were the 2 reasons Alessandro's heart was still beating at all. Vittorio swung too wide, too sure, and Alessandro stepped inside the arc, and spent every remaining ounce of his strength on one final blow. Vittorio Romano hit the concrete and did not rise. What happened next happened fast, the way empires fall not in years, but in a single held breath. Romano's soldiers, watching from the catwalks and the doorways, saw their Don crumpled on the ground, the Don who had dragged them into a dead man's grudge, who had spent their brothers on a 5-year-old defeat. One by one, weapons lowered, then dropped. Marco's voice rolled across the yard through the truck's loudspeaker. The Moretti family declares this war over. Stand down and go home to your families. No one else dies tonight. No one else did. The war between 2 empires ended on the very night it was meant to begin. They caught Vanessa at the south fence, dragging a suitcase of Vittorio's money toward a waiting car. It was Romano's own surviving capos who handed her to the police before dawn, a peace offering, a loose end, a liability no one wanted. The woman who had spent her life selling trust was sold in the end for less than the suitcase she carried. In the yard, the last of Alessandro's strength let go, and Marco caught him as he fell. Medic! Medic! Sound was leaving the world again, the floodlights dimming to soft halos, but he felt the concrete under him, and then warmth. Sophia on her knees beside him, pressing both hands against his chest, her tears falling onto his face, saying his name over and over like a prayer she refused to finish. And then, small and close, a tiny palm against his cheek. Don't sleep, Mr. Sandro, Emma's voice, breaking. Please don't sleep. He tried to answer her. The darkness came first. The private clinic on the hill had treated the Moretti family for 2 generations, and its surgeons had seen everything a violent world could do to a human body. That night, they earned their silence 3 times over. 3 surgeries, back to back, through the dark hours and into the morning. The wound in his side had missed the liver by a finger's width. 1 bullet had cracked against a rib and stopped. The 3rd had come to rest less than 1 centimeter from the aorta, 1 centimeter between this story and a very different ending. At dawn, the chief surgeon came out to the corridor, where Marco stood like a statue that hadn't moved in 7 hours, and said the sentence they would all repeat for years afterward. The fact that he was still alive when he reached my table, that I cannot explain. Then came the waiting. 11 days of coma. 11 days in which the most powerful empire on the East Coast held its breath. Marco ruled from the anteroom of the hospital suite, sleeping in a chair, running the family through murmured phone calls, and he executed his Don's last 2 orders as if they were a dying man's testament. First, a complete ceasefire with the remnants of the Romano organization honored, respected, not one retaliation permitted. Second, the widow and the child were to be protected at any cost. There were 4 guards on the hospital floor at all hours. 2 of them were always within sight of Sophia. Not that Sophia needed to be found. She was always in the same place. She came every single day. No one asked her to. No one paid her for it. She was, officially, a housekeeper on leave from a house that currently had no master. She came anyway, every morning, with Emma's small hand in hers, and she sat in the chair beside his bed and read the newspaper to him aloud, front page to sports, because a nurse had mentioned once that people in comas can sometimes still hear. She told him about the weather. She told him Emma's fever was finally gone. She scolded him, gently, for being reckless, in a voice that broke only when she was sure the room was empty, and every morning she performed the same small ritual. She had washed his mother's lavender handkerchief by hand, over and over, until the last shadow of blood surrendered from the old linen, and each day she folded it and placed it in his open palm, closing his fingers around it. Emma, meanwhile, conducted her own campaign. She could not read newspapers, so she drew crayon drawings, one after another, and she made the nurses tape every one of them to the walls until the sterile room bloomed with color. They were all, every single one, the same picture. A big man, a small woman, a little girl with scribbled curls holding hands under a fat yellow crayon sun. On the 11th day, in the pale hour just after sunrise, Alessandro Moretti opened his eyes. The world assembled itself slowly, in pieces. The ceiling, the soft beep of machines, the weight of his own body, distant and strange. And then the first thing his eyes truly focused on, taped to the bed rail exactly at his eye level, placed there by small hands with great precision, a crayon drawing, a big man, a small woman, a curly-haired child between them, holding both their hands, under a smiling yellow sun. He lay still for a long time, looking at it, while his chest rose and fell around the ache of his wounds, and something in him, older and deeper than any bullet wound, quietly finished breaking and began, at last, to heal. The woman who had promised to love him before 300 witnesses had sold him to his enemy for a price. The woman he had paid to clean his house had sat beside this bed for 11 days, and no one had paid her anything at all. Some truths need no words. They only need a chair beside a hospital bed and someone who stays in it long enough. 2 weeks later, they brought him home to the mansion, and the war for his body began in earnest. Recovery, it turned out, was slower and crueler than any gunfight. Physical therapy that left the strongest man on the East Coast gray-faced and shaking. Nights when the wounds burned too deep for sleep, and he sat by the window counting harbor lights until dawn. Muscles that had to be renegotiated with, step by humiliating step. He did not fight this war alone. Emma had appointed herself chief doctor on the first morning. No one had elected her. She had simply announced it, and no one in the household possessed the courage to object. She took the position with terrifying seriousness. She inspected his lunch tray and refused to leave until every spoonful of soup was gone. She stuck cartoon band-aids on his shirt, directly over the real bandages, to make it heal faster and privately. He began to suspect they worked. And when the therapist struggled to get him through his walking exercises, Emma solved it with a 3-year-old's ruthless genius. She would stand at the far end of the hallway, arms thrown wide, and declare the prize. "Walk to me, Mr. Sandro. If you get here, you get a hug." The man who had once commanded 300 soldiers crossed that hallway on trembling legs, every single day, for the fee of 1 hug. It was the best contract he had ever signed, and Sophia carried him through the rest. Through everything the little doctor couldn't see. This was no longer a housekeeper's duty. Both of them knew it, and neither of them had yet found the courage to say what it actually was. She simply knew. She knew when the pain was bad before he said a word. Something in his jaw told her. She appeared with his medication at the exact hour, adjusted his pillows the moment discomfort crossed his face, and learned to read his silences the way sailors read the sky. And he, in turn, discovered he could recognize her footsteps among all the footsteps in that enormous house, could feel the room grow quieter, easier, the moment she entered it. While his body healed, he rebuilt his empire around a new spine. The ceasefire held, and Alessandro used the long, quiet months to do what no advisor had ever dared suggest. He began pulling the family out of the darkest trades, piece by piece, moving the money into the legal port operations, real estate, logistics. His capos were bewildered. But 3 bullets had taught him what no consigliere ever could: the true price of power built on fear and how little of it remains when you're bleeding out on a dock, with only 2 people in the world crying over you for free. It was during those months that he found the box. He hadn't been prying. Emma had left a toy in the small room off the kitchen, and while retrieving it, he saw the worn cardboard box on the shelf of Sophia's things: old textbooks, anatomy, fundamentals of nursing care, notebooks filled with careful, hopeful handwriting, dated years back, stopped, all of them, mid-page. She had been studying to become a nurse. Then her husband died. The money died with him, and her life narrowed to a single question: whatever job keeps a roof over Emma's head. He asked her about it that evening. She shrugged a small, practiced shrug that was meant to close the subject. "Another lifetime, sir." "Then let me pay for this one," he said. "Tuition, books, all of it." Her back straightened, and he watched a lifetime's lesson rise in her eyes. The kindness of powerful men always comes with strings. "No, listen to me first," he said quietly. "This is not charity. This is an investment in the person whose integrity saved my life. Literally. I would still be marrying a Romano spy if you had stayed silent. I owe you a debt, and this family pays its debts." Sophia was silent for a long moment, pride and fear and a buried dream all fighting behind her eyes. "Then I keep working," she said at last. "Full duties, and you take it out of my wages, every month, until it's paid. Every dollar." Her chin lifted. "I want to earn it." Alessandro looked at her, this woman who had been handed nothing, ever, and had never once asked for anything, and nodded. And for the first time in a life built on inheriting, taking, and winning, he finally understood what the word earn actually meant. "Now let me be honest with you about what happened next. This is not the kind of story where 2 people suddenly fall into a fairy tale overnight, where one dramatic rescue melts into a kiss and the credits roll. Real life almost never moves that fast, and this story has always been more loyal to the truth than to fantasy. What grew between Alessandro and Sophia grew the way real things grow. Slowly, quietly, without either of them announcing it, perhaps without either of them fully daring to look at it. It grew in a year of small moments. It grew at the kitchen table, late at night, where Sophia sat over her nursing textbooks after Emma was asleep, filling notebooks in that careful, hopeful handwriting that had waited years to continue. Alessandro would pass through always with some invented errand and set a fresh cup of coffee beside her books without a single word, and leave. She never asked. He never explained. But the cup was always there, always exactly when her focus began to fade, and some nights she caught herself smiling at the steam. It grew on Emma's first day of kindergarten, when the little chief doctor, 5 years old now, curls as ungovernable as ever, planted her feet at the front door and refused to leave unless both of them took her. So the most feared man on the East Coast stood in a hallway full of cubbies and finger paintings, holding a pink backpack, while Emma introduced him to everyone within reach. The teacher smiled warmly and said, "It's so lovely to meet Emma's family." A silence followed, 1 heartbeat, 2, and neither adult hurried to correct her. Neither of them said anything at all. They just looked away from each other and smiled at the floor. It grew into Sunday dinners that became a ritual. No one ever declared the long formal dining room abandoned in favor of the small kitchen table. 3 plates, Emma narrating her week between bites, and laughter where 14 years of silence used to live. Alessandro's moment of understanding, when it came, was not thunder. It was a Tuesday. A meeting had ended early, and he came home before dark for once. Passing the dining room, he heard Emma's laughter spill through the half-open door, and underneath it, softer, Sophia singing to herself while she cooked, some old, gentle melody. He stopped, and he stood there, outside his own dining room, in the house he had lived in for 14 years, and simply listened. 3 full minutes passed before he realized what he was doing, and with it came the second realization, arriving quietly, like a ship that had been on the horizon a long time. This mansion, this cold marble museum, where he had eaten 1,000 dinners alone, had become a home. He couldn't name the day it happened. It had happened the way spring happens, slowly, and then completely. Sophia's moment came the same season, just as quietly. She noticed it in her own hands first. She had washed the lavender handkerchief every week since the hospital. No one asked her to. It wasn't among her duties. She simply couldn't imagine not doing it. She noticed it again on the nights he came home late from the city, when she found herself listening for the gate, unable to settle until she heard his car on the gravel. And one of those nights, standing at the window with a dish towel forgotten in her hands, she finally admitted what the feeling was. This was no longer the worry of an employee for an employer. It hadn't been for a long, long time. They say a Don's heart is made of stone. Perhaps it is, but nobody ever tells you that even stone melts if the hand resting on it is small enough, and warm enough, and stays long enough. 2 years after that fateful night, in a university auditorium filled with proud families, a name was called from the stage: Sophia, Bachelor of Science in Nursing. And from the front row, a 5-year-old girl in a yellow dress screamed louder than the entire auditorium combined. "That's my mama." Beside her, Alessandro Moretti rose to his feet, clapping until his palms ached, while Sophia crossed the stage in her cap and gown. Think about that image for a moment. 2 years earlier, this same woman had stood in a glittering ballroom, hidden behind a pillar of white orchids, praying that no one would notice her. She had spent her whole life learning how to be invisible in beautiful rooms. And now she stood at the center of the stage, in the light, in the applause, and this time, every eye on her was real. Nobody was performing. Nobody was lying. 300 masks had once ignored her. Today, a room full of strangers stood and cheered. The proposal came 1 week later, and it was the perfect reversal of everything that engagement party had been. No ballroom, no microphone, no 300 guests, no photographers, no string quartet, just the mansion kitchen, on a Sunday evening, the smell of tomato sauce in the air, and a 5-year-old accomplice entrusted with a top-secret mission: carry the little box to Mama when Mr. Sandro gives the signal. Emma lasted exactly 4 seconds. "Mama, Mr. Sandro has a surprise and I'm not supposed to tell you it's a ring." Sophia turned from the stove, wooden spoon frozen in midair, and there he was, the most feared man on the East Coast, kneeling on his own kitchen floor, laughing helplessly at his ruined secret, holding out a small box wrapped in a lavender-embroidered handkerchief. The ring inside was simple, not 4 carats, not a headline, just a quiet, honest ring. "My mother used to tell me," he said, "give this handkerchief to the one who turns your house into a home. She never got to meet you, Sophia, but I think she was waiting for you all along." He did not promise her a life without storms. His past would never allow such a promise, and she would never have believed it. He promised her the only thing he knew he could keep, the thing this whole story had been about from the very first sentence. "Between you and me, there will never be a single lie. Not one, not ever. Will you marry me?" Sophia said yes through tears and laughter at the same time, tomato sauce still bubbling on the stove, and Emma spun circles around the kitchen like a small yellow hurricane until she suddenly stopped, struck by the most important question in the world. "So what do I call you now?" Alessandro lifted her up into his arms, the little girl whose 5 honest words had once saved his empire, his fortune, and his life. "You can call me whatever you want, Piccolina," he said softly, "but I'd be honored if someday you called me Dad." And she did. She still does. My friends, if you've stayed with this story until now, let me leave you with what it taught me. The truth doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes it comes from the very last voice you'd expect a child too young to understand the weight of her own words. A housekeeper with every reason in the world to stay silent. An ordinary person standing quietly at the edge of the room. Vanessa had beauty, strategy, and 2 years of careful planning. Sophia had nothing but honesty and courage, and in the end, the woman who built her life on lies lost everything, while the woman who risked everything for one moment of truth gained a family, a future, and a love that never needed to be performed for an audience. Real love was never about the size of the ring or the grandeur of the announcement. It's about who tells you the truth when a lie would be so much easier. It's about who sits beside your hospital bed for 11 days when no one is paying them to stay. So tonight, I want to ask you from the bottom of my heart, what did this story make you feel? Have you ever met a Sophia in your own life, someone quietly honest whom the world overlooked? Or have you ever had to choose between the truth and your own safety? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and your words truly touch my heart. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It genuinely helps these stories reach more people who need them. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications, because we share touching stories exactly like this one every single day. And if someone in your life needs a reminder that honesty and quiet kindness still win in the end, share this video with them. Thank you for staying until the very end. I wish you and your loved ones good health, a joyful life, and peace in your heart every single day. May you always have someone beside you who tells you the truth, and may you be that someone for the people you love. Goodbye for now, my friends. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.